Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel, Taylor Talks Tales. Today I have a video for you guys, and I know it's been forever since I last uploaded a video. A lot of stuff was going on. I was not able to create the quality content I wanted with some technical errors, time constrictions, you name it. I still was doing a lot of reading though, and so I've got tons of content that I want to share with you and get caught up on and all that good stuff. And hopefully by the time this video is up, my Goodreads will also be updated as well, because I've read over 30 books in the last couple months, so I want to get those reviews out. And yeah, my goal is to eventually have a more regular uploading schedule. I think I can do it now. I have some better equipment, I have better time management, there's a lot less craziness happening, so I'm excited. So I'm not making any promises or guarantees yet, but hopefully the goal is to start out with one video a week and maybe do 2 videos a week. We'll see. But I do know for March I'm at least uploading 3 videos, and they're all focused on women authors or female characters, because March is Women's History Month, and specifically on March 8th we celebrated International Women's Day, which was very cool. And this video is going to be focusing on my favorite horror books that are written by female authors. I'm actually pretty surprised that I had as many as I did, mainly because I'm a big fan of Stephen King and Robert McCammon, so a couple of my all-time favorite horror books were written by male authors, but turns out I actually have a ton of books that are written by female horror authors, and they're incredible books, and I'm just very excited to be able to share them with you. So, to keep this video from being too long, let's get right into the books. And one last thing is, I probably won't be going into much detail on each book, but I'm hopefully going to be doing separate reviews on at least a couple of them. And as always, if there's a request to go in depth on a specific book, just leave it in the comments or message me, however you want to do it. So, anyway, let's get into the books. Okay, so my first book that I'm going to share with you is technically actually a novella, but this is my favorite novella of all time now. I absolutely love this story. I only read it last year because it came out last year, but it's incredible. And that is To Be Devoured by Sarah Tantlinger. And this book, seriously, So the first book I want to share with you is actually a novella, and So the first book I want to share with you is actually a novella, but it has quickly become my favorite novella of all time. Not even just horror novella, but just my all-time favorite novella. And that is To Be Devoured by Sarah Tantlinger. And this was absolutely incredible. I read this story last year, and I ended up reading it a couple of times throughout the year, because it's fairly short, it's a novella, but this is so well done. It's my new favorite novella, and it's hard for me usually to pick a top, #1 favorite anything. Usually I have a top 10 or something, because I read so much, I watch a lot of movies, so it's difficult, but I could actually hands down say this is my favorite novella right now. And it follows a character named Andy and her growing obsession with wanting to eat carrion and raw meat, and her relationship with her girlfriend, and a bunch of complicated things like that, and kind of a descent into madness, but it's so well done, and I was absolutely blown away. And Sarah Tantlinger, she's actually a poet, and it kind of shows in her writing because it's beautifully written, and yes, I just think the story is great. It's not predictable, there's just so much to it, so I highly recommend giving this one a shot. So the next one is also a novella, and that is True Crime by Samantha Kolesnik. I've actually already reviewed this one on my channel, so I will link it down below so you can go check out the full review, but this was also an incredible novella as well, very well written. The story is very interesting and intriguing. Pretty much we're following a pair of siblings. After they kill their mother, they go on sort of this murder spree throughout the country. It's definitely very dark, very gripping. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to read more by Sarah Kolesnik. I feel like she could write a very good full-length novel, so I'm very excited and hope that she can do that at some point. So the next book that I have is The Rust Maidens by Gwendolyn Kiste, which I really think this cover is awesome. In fact, most of the covers on these books are great. This one, I really love this story a lot. There's this melancholy atmosphere to this book, because pretty much you're following this character named Phoebe, and it's sort of told in somewhat a dual timeline, where there's a lot of flashbacks to what happened when she was a child, and then when she's an adult and kind of goes back home to visit, and she kind of grows up in this sort of suburb part of Cleveland that's just really industrial and kind of depressing, and the story follows her, and she knows a couple girls who end up starting to almost develop like into machines, and they're like leaking oil and just a bunch of stuff that's happening to them, and it just kind of tears apart this whole community, and she's a part of it when she's younger, and then it flashes back to when she's an adult, and there's just some great atmosphere to it, and it really does feel very melancholy at times when you're just thinking about this industrial town that's just decomposing and collapsing and just falling apart, and all the issues surrounding that. But definitely a very good book, pretty dark, very interesting and creative, and very enjoyable. This next one I read for the first time last year, and it blew me away. I had not heard of it before, and then I just picked it up on a whim at the library, and I was so glad I did, and that is High Lonesome Sound by Jaye Wells. So, when I first picked this book up, I thought this was actually written by a male author, just because the name Jaye. I know a few male Jays, but towards the end of it, I realized it was a female author, and I just thought that was great. This follows this small town. Basically, a horror author goes to this small town to do some research for this new book, and he goes into this town when they're having this thing called a decoration day, where they kind of take the graveyard and clean it up, and there's other things that are supposed to happen, but it's very clear there's something up with this town, something supernatural, something very spooky, and there's a lot of different characters in here as well. There's some great female characters, and I really enjoyed this a lot. And what's funny too is I'm now dating someone, my boyfriend, he actually is from a small town where they have their own decoration day, so when I found that out, I was just like, ooh, because it was not too long after I'd read this book, and decoration day is the big plot of this book, but highly recommend it if you're looking for like a small town folk horror, like Southern Gothic somewhat, or a book that kind of takes place near the Appalachian Mountains. This is a very good book, very well written and well done. These next two are by the same author. One's a novella and one is a full-length novel. We have White Pines by Gemma Amour, which is a full-length novel, and then we have Dear Laura by Gemma Ahlborn, and this is a novella. Both of these are fantastic, well done, and very dark. This one, I'm going to read one sentence on the back that describes it perfectly. This is the new cosmic folk Celtic cult fantasy horror novel from Gemma Ahlborn. That sums it up pretty much. The description is kind of vague on the back, so I won't go into details on the plot either, because I went into it pretty much blind and really enjoyed it. There's a lot of like dream-like scenes in this, and it's pretty much following a woman kind of going back to her roots, and she inherits this house in this very small town, and it's pretty clear something's up with it, and it just goes from there, and I really enjoyed it. And then Dear Laura is also really well done too. It follows a young girl named Laura, and she ends up getting basically stalked by someone who keeps sending her letters on her birthday, and she has to basically give this unknown person certain items in order to solve the murder of her friend. So basically her friend that she really liked, he ended up getting killed, and the killer is basically saying, I'll give you clues to find your friend's body, but you have to do something for me. And then it gets pretty dark. So both of these were very well done. Highly recommend both. You will not be disappointed. This next one is what I considered a slow burn novel, and it's not going to be for everyone, but if you are really into film or kind of a slower novel where you can learn some stuff, this is a good one, and that is Experimental Film by Gemma Files, who is a Canadian female author, and I really enjoyed this book. I've read it a couple of times. It is definitely a slow burn. It takes a little while to get through, I would say, but it's worth it in the end because there's a pretty good payoff, and the book ends and there's a lot of action that happens. So this one is great if you have an interest in film as well, because the main character, she is, I believe, a film professor of some kind, and she's trying to solve this mystery of this woman who may have very well been the first director ever. Like, she was this old rich woman in like the, I think, early 1900s who had made a ton of these silent films, and then these films are discovered, but there's something very mysterious about it, and then the woman had disappeared, and it's trying to figure out what happened to her. And it's a very interesting book. I learned a lot about film and film history, so I definitely recommend it. But again, it's a little slower paced. There's a lot of information to take in at times, but I enjoyed it. It's a smart book. I feel like I would like to sit down and speak with Gemma Files. She sounds like a very smart woman, so this is a good one if you're looking for something a little different. This next one is actually a kid's book, but I wanted to mention it because I love this story, and it is one of the books that got me into horror, and it's Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downing Hahn. She has written a ton of children's ghost stories, and I feel like they still hold up as an adult. I still think they're kind of creepy and have really good atmosphere. They're super easy and fast to read now as an adult, but they're still great, and if you're looking to get children into horror, or younger teens into horror, or someone who's you don't necessarily want to give them a full adult horror novel, this could be kind of fun to try out. And with this book, basically we're following a family. They move into a house and they're a mixed, like basically a blended family, and there's a bratty stepsister to these two siblings, and she starts talking about her friend Helen, and Helen's gonna come and kind of make them pay type of thing. And at first they're thinking maybe Helen is the little girl's imaginary friend, but then it becomes pretty clear that there's something else going on, something spooky and ghostly. So Mary Downing Hahn, she also has written like Time for Andrew, Doll in the Garden, a bunch of other books, and they're all pretty enjoyable. So she's definitely a great female ghost horror author to check out. This next one is underrated in my opinion in certain circles. I know some people are familiar with this book, but other people have not heard of it. It's a shame that we never got a movie adaptation of this book, because I think it would be a good adaptation. And that is The Auctioneer by Joan Samson. Unfortunately, this was the only novel that Joan wrote before she passed away of cancer at like 38 or something like that. So she was very young, but the book she wrote was very good. It has kind of a Needful Themes vibe to it, because pretty much we have this kind of small town in New Hampshire, and there is this man who moves in. He's the auctioneer, and at first he starts out, he's this great guy, he's raising money for the town, getting them a police force, getting them a new ambulance, doing all of these things, and then things escalate pretty quickly, and soon the rather than going around and taking donations just out of good people's hearts, it becomes mandatory, and it just goes from there. I don't want to spoil too much, but it is a very enjoyable book. If you like Needful Things by Stephen King, it has that kind of vibe a little bit mixed with a few other different things, but I really liked it a lot, and especially it starts off a little slow, but once you get into it, you really feel for this main family, because you follow a husband, wife, and their daughter, and the grandmother, and it's pretty intense at times, so give this one a shot. I think that it needs a little bit more love. These next two books are by the same author, and we have The Twisted Ones and Hollow Places, and these are both by T. Kingfisher. Now with The Twisted Ones, I actually have already reviewed this on my channel, so I'll link that down below. And then the Hollow Places, I still want to, because this was one of my favorite books of last year. So T. Kingfisher, I have been really enjoying her novels. She kind of has a very unique narrative voice, and her characters are pretty unique. They're kind of funny, a little bit quirky. There's definitely some humor in her books, which I think sometimes people can find a little off-putting, but I enjoyed it. I like laughing from time to time in a spooky book, because it kind of alleviates the tension a little bit. I would say of these two, I actually think Hollow Places is probably my favorite of the two, but I would say The Twisted One's a little bit more horror. Basically, we follow a woman who goes to clean out her, I think it's her grandmother's cabin, and like in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, and there's something very creepy going on. She finds her grandfather's journal and is kind of puzzling things together about things potentially in the woods. And then The Hollow Places is following a woman who ends up moving into her uncle's museum after a breakup, and ends up finding a portal to another world, and I just love that aspect. So Hollow Place is a little bit more dark fantasy, and I would say this one's a little bit more traditional horror. Both of them were really enjoyable. If I had to pick one, I'd pick this one, but I like both of them basically. So if you're looking for a good time and interesting characters and some cool world building, especially in this one, give these books a shot. This book is actually my favorite vampire book, if I had to pick a vampire book that was not Dracula. That is Midnight Blue, the Sonia Blue collection. So technically this is actually 3 stories in one, even though it's just one big book. We have Sunglasses After Dark, In the Blood, and Painted Black. This series follows a woman who she basically hunts vampires because she was turned into a vampire against her will basically she was assaulted and turned, and it's a revenge story, but there's other things going on to it, and it's pretty dark. Like, this is not if you want a break from sparkly vampires or romantic vampires or beautiful vampires or just kind of fun and entertaining vampires, and you want like dark, gritty, this is your book. It's definitely for adult, mature audiences, but I really enjoy it, and it's been a while since I've read it, so I'm at some point going to be rereading it, and I am interested to see if maybe a couple people want to buddy read this with me. So it's very good. Highly recommend it, and, you know, written by Nancy Collins. She did a great job with it. Alright, so the next one is Into the Drowning Deep by Myra Grant, also known as Seanan McGuire. This one I really enjoy. I know some people have some issues with it, and it's not necessarily a perfect book, but I really like it. It gripped me from beginning to end, and I think this book would make a perfect blockbuster movie, or maybe like a two-part movie or something like that, but it's very cinematic, and I just really think it's cool. Essentially, we are following this book researching killer mermaids, basically, like trying to make the concept of mermaids scientific and trying to explain mysterious disappearances in the ocean, and I really like ocean things and ocean horror, and like the Mariana Trench is very fascinating to me, so this book had me hooked from beginning to end, and I do think it's a very enjoyable read. It may be a little on the long side, but I had a lot of fun with it, and if you're kind of looking for sort of like a creature feature, that's a little bit different, or if you're looking for some sci-fi fantasy in your horror, this would be a good one. And there's also some LGBTQ rep with a couple of the characters in this as well, so I think this is very fun, and hopefully you can give it a try if you're interested. These next two are by the same author. We have The Red Tree by Caitlin Arkerian, and then also The Drowning Girl by her as well. So these two books are probably my favorite Caitlin Arkerian books, but I've read a few others by her as well. She does all kinds of work. She does horror, dark fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi. She does quite a bit, and I've enjoyed most of her work. This one in particular, I would say, is more of a horror than this one. The Red Tree, we're following a woman after a really bad breakup. She ends up moving to kind of the middle of nowhere in this house that she rents out, and she becomes obsessed with this red tree. And then there's also a story that ties into it as well. So it's almost like one of those sort of like found fiction or like story within a story kind of book, and it's very interesting, and there's definitely like some like folk horror, bit of the occult, supernatural, something going on, and it's written in a very interesting style that I really liked, so this is a good one. It's a little bit of a slow burn at the beginning, but the payoff is good, and I really enjoyed it. Drowning Girl is a little bit more of a psychological thriller, but there are some horror elements to it. Pretty much we're following a woman who has schizophrenia, and she doesn't know what's real, what's not, and there's also some fantastical elements and some spooky things, and it's a little bit of a puzzle as well. Once you read it, you'll kind of understand what I mean by that, but both of these are great, and other works by Caitlin Arkerian are also enjoyable too, so just pick one of her books up and I think you'll really like them. These next two books I'm going to be sharing with you are technically not purely horror, however, horror fans that I know like these books, including myself, and I've recommended these to my friends, my, female, male friends, anybody. Okay, so these next two books are technically not strictly horror, but horror fans will really like them. I think there's a strong correlation between people who like horror and people who like these books. The first one I want to share is one of my favorite books of all time, and that is Night Film by Marisha Passel. I really enjoy this book. This book has so many awesome elements put into it. Pretty much, it starts off as a kind of a detective story investigating the death of the daughter of this very mysterious kind of underground film director. And when I was reading this book, I just pictured the film director as being kind of like a Dario Argento-esque character, but kind of more mysterious. And like, I really want to see all those films that they talk about in this book. Like, hands down, it would be awesome. But this incorporates, like, there's a website you can go to, and then of course there's like pages like this where there's pictures and websites, and all kinds of stuff. It's really well done, and I love the mystery aspect and the thriller aspect, and there's just a lot to this book, and definitely horror fans I think will really like it because there are some horror elements to it, and definitely some like potential supernatural elements that you can, you know, interpret how you will, but it's a great book. So definitely give it a shot. And Marisha Pessl, each book I've read by her, she puts a lot of effort into it. You can just tell that she's a smart lady, and it comes across in her books. The other one is Geek Love by Katherine Dunn. Don't let the title fool you. This is not a love story. This is not a romantic story. This is a very dark story. I think most people will enjoy this book if they know what they're getting themselves into. So if you're looking for something and you're like, oh my god, Geek Love, that sounds cute, it's about carnivals. No, this is a very dark book. It follows basically a family, the Benuskis, I believe, and they end up basically, when the mom was pregnant, she was taking a bunch of like chemicals and a bunch of stuff to basically intentionally make her children come out deformed. So the Benuski parents wanted to have their own freak show, and unfortunately their children had a lot of issues to deal with being born the way they were. But it's more than that. There's a lot to this book. There's sort of some cult elements to it, and it's really kind of focusing on the characters and their relationships, and there are definitely some, like, you know, characters you like want to hate, and then there's other characters that you really like, and it's just very complicated. But because it is quite dark, horror fans will really like it. I really enjoy it, and I do recommend it, but I just always have to tell people, like, it's usually non-horror fans who for some reason want to pick this up, and I'm like, you may want to know what the book's about first before you do. But it's great, and like, especially if you like carnivals and circuses and stuff, there's some appeal to this, but you don't necessarily even have to like carnivals and circuses if you just kind of like a good story that's very dark and you know, it's going to tug at your heartstrings at times and just make you think and sort of get you into the characters, then this is a good choice. These next two books are by the same author. It's actually a duology. So we have Anna Dressed in Blood and Girl of Nightmares. These are both by Kendar Blake. And these have actually been around for a long time, like on BookTube and stuff. I'm sure if you spent time on BookTube in like 2011, 2012, 2013, that kind of time frame, you probably heard about these books because they were pretty popular back then. And for a good reason. They're very enjoyable. And if you liked the TV show Supernatural, which I did for the first few seasons, and then it got kind of, it wasn't as spooky to me anymore, and it kind of got a little crazy, but I did really like the first probably like 6 or 7 seasons of Supernatural, especially the first couple because it was spooky. This captures it well without being a ripoff. You have a character named Cass, and he is a ghost hunter, supernatural creature hunter, and just like he's taking up the family business kind of thing, and he ends up going to this house to try to take out Anna, who's supposed to be like a very dangerous ghost, and things escalate from there. But there's a lot to these books. They aren't strictly horror. They definitely fall under the horror category, but there's other elements to it as well. And I will say that I liked the first one a little bit more than the second one, because the second one incorporates a little bit more of a romance subplot, but it doesn't take over. And I think for YA in particular, these are probably some of my favorite YA horrors, just because for me personally, I haven't found a lot of good YA horror yet. I'm on the lookout, but I tend not to find them a whole lot. So these are definitely good if you're wanting to do some YA horror. Another YA horror story that I recommend, this is actually a bind-up of 2. It's basically the Bloody Mary saga, and it pretty much includes Mary Unleashed and Mary the Summoning, so it's a bind-up of 2 books. I've always been a big fan of Bloody Mary and like urban legends and like where they came from and stuff, and I feel like for YA in particular, I thought that they did a good job with this. It was definitely very scary. They didn't hold back, and there was some teen drama, but at the same time, it was kind of fun to get into the teen drama for this, and yeah, I felt like I was rooting for the main character, and of course, like, they didn't shy away from the Bloody Mary myth, and so I thought this was just a lot of fun. If you want a good Bloody Mary ghost story, this is a good YA one to pick up. This next book, I only read last year, but I really enjoyed it, and that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I especially want to incorporate this one in particular because this is a horror novel written by a female person of color, and it's kind of, this book sort of deals with a bunch of stuff that even can be relevant to today, even though it's set in the 1950s. And I enjoyed this book a lot. I will say, if you don't like Gothic fiction, though, then you're probably not going to like this very much, because this is very Gothic. But I liked it. I like Gothic fiction, like very atmospheric fiction. I like some of the tropes of like weird haunted houses and weird families and all that, so I'm into that. And that's why I liked this book, pretty much. You follow this young woman, and she ends up going to this estate. She lives in Mexico, and she ends up going to this British estate that's in Mexico, trying to track down her, I think it's her, either her sister or her cousin, who ended up marrying into this family, and then she doesn't hear from her sister or cousin, and she's very concerned because she ends up getting a letter that's just kind of weird. And so her father's like, you need to go, go check on her. Yeah, let's see what's up. And so she goes to this estate, and clearly there's something up. And so it's about her trying to figure out what that is, and there's definitely some supernatural elements happening, and in particular, there are a couple very creative aspects of this book that I really enjoyed, and it was, well written, had good imagery, and you are really rooting for the main character. So this is a good one to pick up if you're looking for some good Gothic fiction. Alright, I have two classics on here because you gotta have some classics. First one is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson, you can't really go wrong with her. I will say, if you are a modern horror reader and you are going back to Shirley Jackson, just know that her horror is not in your face kind of horror. It's a lot more subtle and more atmospheric, and some people are a little bit off-put by that. They expect it to be super, super intense because a lot of people say these books are scary. I don't necessarily think Shirley Jackson books are scary, but I think they're very thought-provoking. I think they're very well done, they're well written, and very enjoyable, and so I do recommend them. Just, have reasonable expectations for what the books are going to be like. But I do say this one is, I think, better than Hill House by Richard Matheson. They both have very similar concepts, but I like the execution of this one a lot better. Because this one, both books kind of have to deal with like a group of people spending the night in a haunted house trying to prove the existence or disprove the existence of the afterlife and ghosts and all of that. And I think that Shirley Jackson did a little bit better, and she's a classic horror author for a good reason. So this is a good one. The other classic horror novel I'm putting on here is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. The reason why is that I feel like you can't really appreciate the horror genre, especially women writing horror and sci-fi and weird fiction, without kind of going to the source, because we owe a lot to Mary Shelley. And I think Frankenstein really is a classic. It's a classic horror novel. I think everybody knows what Frankenstein's about. Victor Frankenstein, basically reanimating a corpse and dealing with the aftermath of that. And it's not thought-provoking. It's also very short, and chances are you probably have had to read it in school or read it in college. If you read it in high school and you didn't like it, maybe give it a shot when you're a little bit older. You may appreciate it a little bit better. So I definitely recommend giving good old Frankenstein a go. Alright, so we're almost at the end. Only a couple more books. This next one, funny enough, I went back and forth on how I felt about it for a while, but ultimately I decided I really liked it, and I think people should give it a shot. And that's The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling. Now, the reason why I was hesitant at first to like it was because it is slightly anticlimactic. Like, I'm not going to shy away from that aspect, but for a good chunk of this book, it is incredibly creepy and very atmospheric, especially if you're someone like me and you're claustrophobic and being trapped underground kind of is something that freaks you out, then yeah, this is definitely one to really check out. This one follows a young woman. She wants to start a new life for herself, and she's willing to basically do whatever it takes to do that. So she takes an assignment where basically she goes underground to look for something. There's this planet, because this is sort of a sci-fi futuristic story, and she's like going in this ground to search for whatever this company wants her to search for. And she even has like the suit where they like reroute her organs to make sure she doesn't have to like get out of this suit, because she has to be completely masked up and completely scentless, or whatever's in the cave system will get her. And then at a certain point, it's just her and her handler, who's this woman who you're not sure what her story is, but she seems a little unstable, and it's kind of about their relationship and her trying to survive, and there are definitely some very creepy moments. So the more I thought about this book, the more I'm like, you know what, because it's stuck in my head for so long, I do recommend giving it a go, even if I kind of wish that the climax was a little bit stronger, but still entertaining, and I think a lot of people will probably like it. Just, you know that one caveat about it being a little anticlimactic. Okay, the last one is a short story collection that I really enjoy, and that is Slasher Girls and Monster Boys. So this is a young adult short story collection. The reason why I want to mention it is there are some male authors who contributed to this collection, but it was edited by a female horror author, and a lot of the contributors are female authors. Not all of them are specifically horror, but like Kendar Blake contributed to this, and actually Jonathan Mayberry contributed to this as well, and I really like his Rotten Ruin series and a couple other series of his. And like Nova Rensuma is known for some like ghost story type books, but this is really enjoyable. If you're looking for something kind of spooky but like not over the top, I enjoyed this quite a bit. I think with YA fiction in particular, sometimes the short stories can be very hit and miss, but most of them are actually pretty good in this collection, and it really sticks with the kind of the monster theme and the kind of like killer theme, and definitely it's a very good read around Halloween, and you know, if you're just looking for something different, this is a good short story collection. The next book I want to talk about is also YA fiction, and that is Bleeding Violet by Dia Reeves, which I've always really appreciated this cover. And I also want to include this book because this is also a female horror author who's also a person of color. This book came out in 2009, and I think people did not appreciate this book back then because it got a lot of mixed reviews, but I happen to really love it, and I think that some readers should go back and either try to reread it, or people nowadays may appreciate a little bit more, because it's a very odd book. We're following a main character named Hannah, and her father dies, and so she ends up trying to track down her mother, who lives in a tiny town called Portero, Texas. And her father was Swedish, and her mother is African American, and she's never really met her mother before, so she has like this very strange relationship. But she ends up showing up at her mom's house, her mom takes her in, but Hannah is bipolar, and she's also living in this town where basically a lot of people die, and there's lots of monsters, and there are these magical doors that pop up, and then monstrous things come out, and it's very brutal, lots of death is happening, and it's all about her kind of trying to find her place in Portero and establish this relationship with her mother, also trying to figure out what's fact from fiction, and a bunch of other stuff like that. And she's kind of like a very interesting and quirky character, and I really liked her as a character. And I hope that more people do give this book a shot. And that famous Tumblr quote, she was like the moon, part of her was always hidden, was actually from this book. So I'm sure a lot of people quoted that Tumblr quote without ever realizing that it was from this book. But definitely a fun YA horror that I happen to really like. It has, you know, fantasy elements as well, and it's not like, you know, super scary, but I thought it was very fun and very creative, and I've always had a soft spot in my heart for this book, just because I've read it multiple times, and it was one of the 2 books I brought with me out to college when I was starting college, so I love this book, and I hope that a few people will give it a shot, and hopefully this will get more love. Alright, that's it. Thank you so much for watching my video. This is not a comprehensive list at all. There are plenty of other books written by female horror authors out there, but these are just the ones that I have read and like really like and really recommend. But again, there's so many out there. I could have made like a gigantic 2-hour long video talking about all the ones that I've read, but these are just some of the most enjoyable ones that I found. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what you think of them. If there's a specific book that you want me to go more in depth on and review, also let me know. And it's great to see you guys, it's great to be back, and I'm looking forward to making more videos. So thank you so much for supporting the channel. Please like, comment, rate, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later.